Hey everyone, I'm excited to introduce to you Jesse Rothstein, who is a key account manager at LinkedIn in our LinkedIn Sales Solutions division, and really excited to share with you. He just released a book, which I found really interesting. Been recommending it to a lot of my peers and colleagues, called "Carry That Quota," which is sales tactics and stories by the rep and for the rep. Excited to have you on the podcast. So this is actually episode 100, so a really big
Wow.
milestone of mine.
Congratulations on 100 episodes. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's helped me. It's almost like it's the coolest thing because you get to talk to amazing people like yourself, and people are so receptive, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. So it's been a treat for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for making the time. What I really, because a lot of people have asked me like, what are your main takeaways from the book? And I've been telling a lot of people just the commitment that you have to the craft of sales, right? And then sales as the profession, right? I think many people who aren't as familiar, who aren't in professional sales, they think people who are manipulative or people who can be, boiler room style type of environment. But really, I think the profession has evolved over the years, and there's so much sophistication, and you can really make a career out of it. And being Asian, I feel like not a lot of Asian parents probably would say, hey, you should be a professional salesperson, right? I think
Mm.
the more typical advice is like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, or go into finance, go into banking. But clearly, there's a lot of opportunity in sales.
There is. I believe it's a great profession. I believe it gets a bad rap in society, as you alluded to. But when done the right way, like any profession, it can be a beautiful thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I really liked your stories and examples in the book, right? From clients who are a little bit harder to build trust with, and anytime it's storytelling, obviously, like I think it resonates a lot more because we can all kind of think back to some of our hardest clients where it was it was probably much harder than we thought, but reflecting back on it, it's like, okay, well, like that made it so much better, and really the respect that comes from really truly understanding a company's business and who is involved in the process and everything like that.
Sure, sure.
So I'm curious. I'm sure there was a lot of people that said that, hey, you should write a book. Like, what was a pivotal point in your career where you thought, like, I think now is the right time to release the book.
Yeah, so I can pinpoint it exactly for you. I was working for LinkedIn overseas. I started with LinkedIn in the Asia Pacific region. I was based in our Sydney, Australia office. And part of the territory in the ANZ region is New Zealand. And I was in New Zealand for quite a bit of time for client meetings and trying to build our sales solutions business in New Zealand with our New Zealand clients. And one specific client in particular, one night over dinner and a few drinks, um, started getting into a pretty deep conversation about the concept of legacy. And
Mhm.
in that part of the world, and especially in New Zealand, the whole notion of doing things in your present life to give back and set up the next generation is very much a core part of their thinking as to what they do at work, but also what they do outside of work. And this at the time it was a customer, and that person has obviously become a close friend. We were having a very open dialogue over dinner, and he sort of challenged me and said, what are you thinking about doing today that will
Mm,
be able to be bestowed upon the next generation when you're sort of no longer around?
mm,
And that conversation, it impacted me greatly. And
mm.
I myself kind of couldn't get the conversation out of my head for a few days. And
Wow.
the concept and the idea of writing a book was something that had been swirling in my mind. And that evening, it sort of came to the forefront, and I
Mm,
sort of said to myself, maybe this is sort of the moment for me that I need to like put this into action and make it
mm,
happen. And that's the point in time where the book went from sort of this idea to
mm.
an idea that needed to be executed.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I think many of us want to publish a book in our lifetime, right? And a lot of us push it off. It's like, oh, I'll do it one day, or
That's right.
maybe when I get older, or maybe when I have grandkids, right? I think many of us aspire to be like you, right? Just kind of put themselves out there, because it is a very vulnerable process, right? Like to really have potentially millions of people really knowing a lot about your inner mind, right? It can be very vulnerable. So really appreciate you. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're really putting yourself out there, right? Like, I feel like it's the cool thing about a book is like, even though this is our first time really meeting, like, I feel like I know you in a way, right? Just because you really poured your heart and soul into this creation.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you're exactly right. There's a section in the book. The first section is this whole notion and idea of knowing yourself, and I think it's critical in sales, but I also think it's critical in life in general. You gotta over time become more self-aware, and I don't think we ever become truly 100% self-aware. I know I'm
Mm,
still self-conscious about a lot of things, but the exercise of writing the book, especially writing it and then ultimately publishing it, is just a major, major way to put your ideas and thoughts out there. And
mm,
listen, some people are going to like it, some people are not, but
mm,
that's all part of the process of just
mm.
getting your ideas and thoughts on paper and letting the world see it.
Yeah, I mean, you've inspired me to commit more to even publishing my book. I'm releasing one in a couple months, and
Great.
it's awesome because the more you see it happen with people around you in your network, I think it just inspires you to really just take the plunge, right? I think you're never true, like you said, you're never truly like 100% self-aware, but
Right.
just the process of going through it and the partnerships, which you it very eloquently like acknowledged in your book, also really shows you the team effort, right? It really does take an army to put something like this together.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Another thing I really enjoyed about your book is just like going back to like committing to your craft and really just, I mean, clearly you're someone who, because I think a lot of time people, don't realize that there's so many components and aspects to sales. I think sometimes people think it's like, oh, it's just someone who's charismatic or someone who just woke up with the gift of gab, but you really dissected and broke down like, well, actually there were a lot of moving parts and there was a lot of players that have really helped me become who I am. And I just respected the fact that you really were able to acknowledge like so many chapters in your life and weave it into like a cohesive story that kind of ties it all up together.
Yeah, thank you. It was it was very, very adamant when putting it together that people would remember the stories more than they would sort of the lessons, so to speak.
Mm,
So it was a massive content generation effort to weave the stories into the lessons that
mm.
we wanted to bestow as part of the book. And I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it, and hope that others feel the same, because stories are things that people remember in work related stuff, and even just life and entertainment as we know it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of sales, right? Because I think back in the day we used to be more just the person that gives the information, right? More
Right.
like, here, I have access to information that you don't. But like you said in your book, with Google and the internet, we're really not information give. I mean, yes, we are like to a certain extent, but it's really more than just that. So I think the profession of sales has evolved so much that it seems like every year there's something that's changing. So you really have to be adaptive and really adjust to the new conditions, even obviously right now in the middle of a pandemic and, leveraging technology versus the in-person meetings that we're so used to.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the pandemic obviously has exacerbated this, not only in the sales profession, but I think in business as a whole. And one of my favorite writers and someone that I sort of look up to, and he's a very world renowned writer, is Thomas Friedman. And he's recently quoted in saying that businesses are seeking people, and they're seeking people to develop this radar and this skill set to find problems as well as
Mm,
solve problems. And I
mm,
think you're right. In the sales profession, as the internet has evolved and as more information has become available, people who are buying things can get information with a simple Google search on their phone or on their laptop. But whether or not they can find problems within their organization and then seek solutions to those, that's sort of to be determined. And I think really good
mm.
salespeople and really good business people, as we work through the pandemic and also hopefully work past it, I think companies are going to need to develop their people and the skill sets of their people to find problems both within their organization as well as outside their organization, because
Mm,
that's ultimately how you're going to get better. And
mm,
I think the more that salespeople can develop this radar to not only find the problems but solve the problems, whatever it is they're selling, whatever product or service it is, I think they're going to be better for it, because
mm.
commodities these days are commodities. Whatever it is you're selling, for the most part, if there's a competitor, and you get down to a pricing conversation, it's sort of a race to zero.
Yeah.
But if you're the salesperson or the business person who has helped that client find the problem and associate a cost to that problem,
Mm.
then you've potentially saved them a lot of money, because you've brought them something they didn't even know they needed.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I remember I went through a training at my first BDR job where they called it the bond of joint discovery.
Mm,
And that always resonated with me because if you're the person that helped them diagnose that, and then I like what you even added a second component to it where you can actually quantify that.
yes.
That's the gold, and that's a good takeaway. I'm gonna have to definitely leverage that in my meetings and my discoveries.
Sure. Sure.
And I like what you said about because I do think a lot of people, at least for me, I always thought about a sales from an external component, but I liked how
Yep.
you talked about the internal wins as well, right? Really getting the buy-in from whether it's an executive leadership team or just resources, having a technical resource or sales engineer or whatever it is, getting support. I liked how you illustrated that actually half of sales is the internal game as well, like within the organization, right? So I think a lot of us don't think about that the way that you dissected it.
Yeah, no, the internal sale is often harder than the external sale. And one of
Yeah.
the things I found throughout my career is, as you go up the chain and as you go up the ladder with your internal resources, the more and more senior you get, typically, within the business, often the less connected they are to the bloodstream of the business at the customer level.
Mm,
Therefore, you as the client-facing seller or leader of the pursuit, you have to educate, you have to inform the folks internally to understand what's really kind of going on in the marketplace. And again, that internal selling process, depending on how complex it can be, can take a lot of time, but it's absolutely critical, and it's an important skill set that salespeople need to not only think about but continually work on.
yeah, I like the part that resonated with me. Well, there was a bunch, but when you said understand your coworkers' personal goals and why they're doing what they're doing, this requires recognizing that people measure success in different ways. I found that everyone has different internal reason as to why they come to work every day, and many people are focused on making as much money as possible, but some simply just want to come to work, earn a decent wage, and provide for their family. And I think it's just interesting, right? Because we think we assume that, hey, just because you're a salesperson, you're in it for the money, right? But there's so many other aspects like family and culture, whatever it is, right? And really just taking that time to really get to know what like he or she cares about versus what you think they care about based on title.
That's exactly it. No, that's exactly it. And I think, even in the times we're in, with the pandemic and, all of us sort of forced to be remote over the past, 8, 9 months. I think, people's overall value equations
Mm,
are changing. And I think that work
mm,
is definitely an important component of life. I think people still value their careers and want to do well. But I also
mm,
think they've gotten a different sense of, what they really want outside of work,
mm,
because our normal lives, to a certain extent, have really been taken away from us. And
mm,
it's forced this, I think, recalibration of people's
mm,
value equations. And
mm.
look, everyone's got different things that make them tick. That's what makes the world go around.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I mean, that's such a deep conversation, and it's hard to say, I'm grateful for this pandemic, but in reality, I don't think I would have had so much time to write my book if I was too busy
Right.
commuting, especially because now I'm moving to Jersey. Like that commute is 3 hours door to door.
Right.
So, just being able to focus on thinking more about my legacy, which is what your friend and your one of your clients told you. I think it's key. I think we should all take some time to really reflect on, okay, yes, like it's great I'm winning President's Club and I'm doing this, but like how are people going to remember me when I ultimately, we all ultimately pass away eventually, right? But
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
who do I want to be for the world intentionally?
That's right. And I talk about this a little bit in the book as it relates to personal development, but I was deeply affected. I was in college during the events of 9/11, and
Mm,
it impacted me in a very, very big way. And
mm,
then, unfortunately, a couple of years later, I lost a friend. In college, there was an accident. Believe it or not, during a lacrosse game, and that friend passed
mm,
away in a freak accident. But for me, to your point earlier, like that, you don't know when your number is going to be up. And
mm,
I think a lot of times, especially in a New York Northeast environment where people do work quite hard and they work long hours. Don't get me wrong, work's important and your career is important, but when all is said and done, if you strip the work away, um, what do you have if you don't have your
mm.
family and your friends and your health? And I do think the pandemic has forced people to think this way a little bit differently, because you just never know. You just never know, and that's kind of how life works.
Yeah, it's a deep conversation. I think most people that read sales books, they don't think about going into that. Like they're like, oh, when you pick up the book and the title, you're probably not like, oh, I'm really gonna take look at my values and
Right.
look at life beyond work. But that's the cool thing about like a book and really just putting yourself out there because people can listen to the stories that you share about your friend and that unfortunate, that it's crazy, right? And but like you said, you never know. Like Tony Hsieh the other day passed
Right.
away, and I looked up to him. When I read his book, like it
That's right.
greatly like impacted me, and to see that
That's right.
mental health and he kind of isolation really did mess with him. Like that, it's sad because he's impacted so many lives.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a tragedy, and he was a young guy. He was a really young
Yeah,
guy. So yeah.
yeah. Um, But yeah, well, no, I appreciate you sharing these stories. I really liked your story about. I think the way you just because I do think a lot of people glamorize like tech sales as well, right? Like just from the outside, or even people in sales ops, people just look at the commission checks and they're like, oh my god, what are these guys doing that they're making like twice or triple what everyone else is making, right? So they think, oh, it can't be that hard, right? But I liked how you also talked about the other end of the spectrum where, hey, not every day is rosy, right? Like, your routine from waking up early to how you set yourself up for the next day to just how you structure your days and how you structure your calendar. It really goes to show the level of detail and the level of sophistication that goes into your day to day.
Yeah. No. Thanks for highlighting that. I mean, I would say the profession itself has a lot of highs and lows, and often the lows don't get talked about enough. And I think
Yeah.
that There's a lot of discussion of, oh, salespeople are, they're all these big hitters and they make this big money and that's what they're in it for. And they want to obviously pad their commission check. But I think what often doesn't get talked about is, as a salesperson, you to a certain extent have to fall in love with the grind. And
Hmm.
you've got to realize that, you're going to be rated on a scorecard that is typically a 12-month quota.
Yeah.
And that quota is something that's been created by a group of people that said, during this date and this date, if you exceed this number, you're doing well. When the reality is, often customer decisions or customer problems don't get sussed out in that time, and
Mm.
solutions don't get proposed and signed in that time.
Yeah.
And if you exceed that number within that 12-month period, you're a hero. And if
Mm.
you miss it, you're a villain. And
Yeah.
it's just this very fickle profession where oftentimes people don't really understand or see, unless they've done it, they don't necessarily see the journey and the highs and
Mm.
lows that go into it. And
Yeah.
we talk a lot in the book about time management, and that is extremely important. But we also talk a lot about the journey of the sale and the meetings and the
Mm.
relationships and the conversations that happen, which I would argue, as I get older, I almost to a certain extent get more value out of the journey
Mm.
and the process to get to a sale or a
Mm.
solution than the actual signing of the contract and
Mm.
the DocuSign going through and the
Mm.
commission check happening.
Yeah.
It's often not talked about enough, but the lows, I think, are where the real learning happens.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, just even reflecting on obviously I haven't been at LinkedIn as long as you have, right? But there were a couple quarters where I questioned, like, do I want to be in sales the rest of my life? Because it was brutal, you know? And
Yeah,
then, fast forward 6 months later, and, luckily I'm at 230% of my half, right? With
that's
still some
awesome.
time, but still those 70 something percent quarters, like, man, that really messed with my ego. And like you said, but then now I can look back at it. I'm like, okay, well, those months where I really grinded and really, put in the effort. Whereas like right now, I'm not gonna lie, like it is a little bit harder to stay as motivated. Whereas when I was like 70%, I was like, dude, like my life is depending on this, So I was clearly hustling a lot more, but
Yeah, yeah. No, I will tell you, I have I've missed my number more than I've made my number throughout my career. And
Mhm.
I've been in situations where the times that I've missed have been extremely frustrating because, in sales, it's your number. I mean, that's kind of the holy grail that you shoot towards. But
Yeah.
I will tell you, looking back, I have learned more during the time periods when I've missed my number than when I've actually made my number.
Mhm.
And I think there's this mindset that you've got to develop as a salesperson, not only in sales, but I think in business as a whole, is that you've never arrived. You've never mastered the craft. You can
Mhm.
always get better, and you got to remain humble, and you got to remain hungry. And we're fortunate. We're at a company that does a nice job sort of celebrating success, and we've got
Yeah.
incentives from a financial standpoint, and we've got things like club and things that we can shoot for. But I just personally get inspired by the salespeople that are the most humble, that are constantly
Mhm.
saying to themselves, I haven't arrived yet and I still want to get better. And
Mhm.
even the ones that maybe are a little bit more mature and a little bit older in their career, that are still at it, that are still
Mhm.
doing the little things, the dirty work. They've
Yeah.
got this mindset that they just haven't arrived and they still want to get better.
Yeah, it's so true. I interviewed like three of our large account executives in the learning division, and that was the takeaway from those interviews. Like Brian Morrow, like he's so successful, has closed so many millions of dollars of deals, and when you talk to him, you get the fact that he's always like he's still trying to learn from me, and I'm like, dude, like what, you have like 20 years on me. What do you mean? I mean,
That's
not
right.
20 years, but you have a lot more experience than I do. And same with Mimi and Liz, right? Like they're both killing it, like way like 200% of quota. And they're so humble. They're like, oh man, like there was that one area I think I could have improved on, and oh man, I think I used too many filler words, and I'm just like, oh my god, like I thought it was perfect, but that's why they're so successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I so to your point on calendar management,
Yeah.
because I think that's applicable across whether you're in sales or not. I liked your advice on maintaining one master calendar for the rest of your entire life.
Yes.
Um, because I'm not gonna lie, like when I have like my Google and then my Outlook, and then like I'm just like I don't know, I'm like it's such a simple advice, but it's something we don't really think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned this very early in my career, and I think having one calendar for all of your business and personal needs is the way to go. And it just
Yeah.
enables you to have everything centralized in one spot, and you're not constantly toggling back and forth between two systems.
Yeah, yeah, it's so do you put everything in Outlook? Is that like your go-to?
Yeah, for me, I use my corporate email. So I use my LinkedIn email, and I am using Outlook, and it's everything. It's everything from work related stuff during the business day to personal stuff. If I've got a personal call or appointment or a something on the weekend, I throw it in there. That's what I use, and then it syncs to my phone, and just everything is in one spot.
Yeah, that's good advice. And so I something else that I think a lot of people should do a lot more of is just simply just saying thank you, and just like a handwritten note or just saying thank you via email. I remember I had a manager once that said like, Davidson, you say thank you too much, like because the whole like being on equal playing grounds and kind of knowing your worth. I think that was
Yeah,
like what he was trying to get at. But I think there's just something just humbling that I think you just want to be authentic to who you are. But I think when is it bad to say thank you? Like I feel like it's always a good thing to acknowledge people's times. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. I think it's a human etiquette thing where saying thank you for someone giving their time on a call or a meeting or whatever it might be. You can never do it enough. We're having this conversation now on your podcast, and I would say, I say thank you for having me. It's an investment of your time, and it's an investment of my time, and their time is valuable. Um,
Mm,
I think that when you do really simple things well over
mm,
long periods of time consistently, they add up to really big things. And
mm.
something like thank you, while it might take, I don't know, 30 seconds to write a note, something maybe even less time if you do it in a text message, whatever. I think it's the right thing to do, both for work stuff and not work stuff.
Yeah, and I also think it gives you an opportunity to reflect on the week or on the end of the month or whatever it is too, right? So, because it's almost the end of the year, this is when I'll send a lot of my just gratitude notes, like for people that have helped me throughout the month or the week or the year.
That's
So
right.
it's just a good place to kind of wrap up and, hey, these were my takeaways. So, let's say 3 months down the line, when I release my book, I could, give you thank you and say, hey, you've inspired me to like really truly commit to my book, right? And kind of having that reflection just builds deeper bonds as well.
Absolutely. And I'd love to give it a read. So when it does come out, you got to send me a copy.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Well, I think like another thing that you talk about that I think is such a valuable thing to learn is when you said reducing decisions. You said each day we're asked to make decisions as part of our lives. Reducing the number of decisions you need to make each day will enable you to direct your brain power to other more important things. Basic decisions like what you wear to work, what you need to pack for a business trip, or what you'll be eating for lunch can slow you down and hamper your productivity.
Yes, yes. So I go out of my way to find ways to reduce the decisions I have to make in my life. And I'll share a few examples. So like you can probably see I'm not a real big fashionista, so I'm not a big clothes person. But for work, when I was, out and about and we weren't in the pandemic and I was out visiting with clients, like I have, you know, two or three types of the same dress shirt in different colors that I just kind of cycle through. And that's what I use for work. Same thing with
Yeah.
shoes, same thing with pants, same things with, jacket or tie if I need one. Um, as it relates to, food, I'm really boring. Like I eat
Mm,
sort of the same stuff over and over again. And I just say to myself, I don't want to have to make a decision about what I eat. So I just typically eat a
mm,
lot of the same stuff. Um, I find when your creativity and your brain power is being used on things where you really want to stretch it, um, it just enables for more productive work and better thought. So what I would consider to be the simple things like what to wear, what to eat, I just say I want to do least path of resistance.
mm.
Now my fashion style is probably suffering, and who knows, maybe my diet is a little boring, but I'll take that because it enables me to not think about making those decisions. I just roll with them. And then the stuff
Yeah.
where I really want to spend some deep thought, that's where I spend my horsepower.
Yeah, it's something we don't think about too much, right? I think Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs are also good examples of that, where they wear pretty much the same thing.
Same thing, right?
So if it works for them, it'll definitely work for us. Um, but yeah, that's such a good point because I'm not gonna lie, there's so many times where just picking what to eat, right? Like how much time, and if we like think about all the time we spend thinking about what to eat for dinner, or like for most people, like that adds up to a lot of time. It's probably hours and hours, like every month. If you think about, oh man, like should I go to Chipotle or should I get, it's there's so much energy that we honestly just don't think about too much, and it really does have a compound effect.
It does. It does. And yeah, it's again, I'm like a really, really firm believer on you've got your priorities both at work and outside of work, and you want to spend your time appropriately to try to move things forward with those priorities. And when you've got to spend energy and brain power on stuff that I would consider to be not that important, you just to a certain extent try to automate it. And don't get me wrong, I love to eat, but I just wind up eating the same things over and over again.
Yeah, I like that. And then for what you wear for work too, right? I'll just use my wife for example. Like the amount of times she's like, "Hey babe, can you help me choose between this and this?" Like I just go crazy. Sometimes, I'm just like I'll just I'll be like, "Yeah, that one." It's like I don't really
Right.
like think about it too much, but yeah, she does spend a lot of time like trying to figure out her outfit for the day.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I'm not exactly a fashionista, and I could probably learn a thing or two from a fashion standpoint, but I'm willing to sacrifice that because I've got a blue shirt, I've got a white shirt, I've got a purple shirt, I've got a pink shirt, and I've got like two or three each, and that's kind of what I go with for client meetings. That's just my thing. Um,
Yeah.
but it just enables me to just keep moving and not get bogged down with what I would consider to be smaller decisions.
Yeah, so many takeaways. Well, Jesse, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. I learned a lot, and I think a lot of people will enjoy your book. It's actually a pretty simple read too, right? It's not one of those books that's like, takes months and months to read, right? You can really bang it out in a week, right? It took me less than a week, and
Awesome.
what I'm doing with some of my peers is having like a book club discussion where we kind of just go a little bit more about like each person's takeaways and how we can have just small actionable items and what we want to implement into our process. So,
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's kind of the thesis or the hypothesis when writing the book was I wanted to keep it really below 300 pages. I wanted to be one of those books that you sort of kept on your desk or kept in your bag and highlighted it and marked it up. And if you're a seller and you're carrying a quota, it's the kind of book that you'll sort of go back to and refer to it. And like you said, whether you're reading it or listening to it on Audible, I mean, it's couple-hour read. You could probably get through it, in at least a week. But yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. This was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to stay in touch. And this definitely was the highlight of my morning. So thanks for having me.
thanks, Jesse. I do have a quick question. How was the
All right.
Audible process? Like, did you have to do a lot of takes, or I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I worked with a publisher, and the publisher connected me with a person like who actually reads and records books like as their job.
Okay.
And the recommendation from the publisher was having somebody do it in their own studio versus you doing it on your iPhone. It'll
Uh,
sound better, and this is what they do for a living. It's their specialty. So
right.
that's the direction I went. So it's actually not me doing the audible version. It's a
Uh,
professional narrator who does that for a living.
yeah, it's interesting because for me, I personally like it when the person does it themselves, but I know there's a lot of people that prefer like the more like the professional, just because like you said, like they do that for a living. So,
That's right.
it's interesting. But no, thanks for sharing all that. I think many of us, for anyone who's listening who wants to publish their own book, definitely reach out to Jesse. Like it's a great book, and the process. So he talks a lot about acknowledging the people that has helped him create the book, and definitely like the gratitude is well respected, and I love it when people are very appreciative, because at the end of the day, it takes a team and it takes an army to get something like that done. So thanks, Jesse. Have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks for having me.